Okay, hope everyone can still hear me. You wave at me frantically if you can. Good, splendid. Right, let me start. Right, everyone see my first slide okay? Another bit of waving, yeah? Okay, so let's get started today. Okay, I think I'm recording again. Right, so my talk today is entitled Udla, Udla, Udla. And it's all about the Schatkovskys of Łask, Piotrków in Poland. You may be wondering why there's this picture of Torah, Torah, Torah. There really is no connection with the Japanese invasion of Pearl Harbor. But when I came up with the title Udla, 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 it just reminded me of Torah, Torah, Torah. So I'm just using a little bit of artistic license. Let me tell you a little bit about me, though I think you know more about me than I do. So, yep, I am the current chairman of the JGSGB. Been doing this for about 35 years, despite what it says on the slide. And I have lots of different families that I'm researching, but today we're going to focus on the Schatkovsky family from Poland and the Pineris family, also from Poland. So why am I qualified to talk about Poland? Well, I had my DNA done, and I was very delighted to come back as 93% Jewish diaspora. I think many of us have had similar results. This was from Family Tree DNA. And there's this great big blue dark blob right over Poland and the Pale of Settlement. So I reckon that qualifies me to talk about Poland. So what we're going to talk about is my Schatkovsky family that I will introduce you to. Then I'm going to move to a short section on what I call the last of the Schatkovskys, where they came from, a place called Łask. It's written Lusk, but there's a little line through the L, which means it's pronounced like a W. Talk through the 3 brick walls that was stopping me in the research. And then if you are experts on Polish records, I want to introduce you to Unicat, Duplicat, and secret records that you may not know about, because I didn't when I started this research. There are 3 marriages and 1 birth in Łask, and then a couple of Shmuels to talk about, and finally conclusion and the lessons learned. So, the Schatkovskys. This is my grandma Rose, her wedding picture. She married into the Dworkin family, my grandpa Lou, and that was back in 1932. And of course, it was captured on film. And this is a nice Boris picture that is on the wall of my mother's house in Bournemouth. Saw it yesterday. And hopefully you all know about Boris, a very famous Jewish photographer. He basically was famous for turning poor East End Jews into Hollywood film stars by making them look great in their wedding pictures. And I just happened to notice that there's a talk by Michael Bennett, Boris's son, coming up in the next week by an organization called something like WSERS. Anyway, in the Q&A, if you're interested, ask me about that and I'll try and find some more details, but should be interesting, probably more historical than genealogical, but many of us have these Boris pictures of our parents and grandparents, so I'm particularly proud of the few that we have. So Rose, my grandmother, was born a Schatkovsky. This is her birth certificate, and you see she was born 26th January 1907, Spittal Street. Names of her parents are here, Simon and Leah. and Simon apparently was a journeyman tailor. At the time, looks like he couldn't write in English because he's just put a mark, an X for some reason, and yeah, so in the Mile End area of London that was registered. Marriage certificate. Don't actually have this, but here are the details of it. I ordered this about 2 months ago in time for this talk, and I've been having a devil of a job due to COVID with the General Register Office, and they haven't sent it to me. And when I call them, they hang up on me. When I email, they say this isn't important enough to deal with. So they have my money, but sadly I don't have a certificate. So, sorry about that, but we do have the ketubah, so that's stored within the family, and here we see Lou Dworkin marrying Rose Schatkovsky on the right-hand side, the English part, and zooming in on the Hebrew, we get to see some Hebrew names. So Lou is Arialev ben Rev Tzvi. That's my great-grandfather Harris Dworkin. And Rose is Ritza, daughter of Simon the Levi, Shimon Halevi. So if you don't read Hebrew, there it is transliterated in English, and you probably read Hebrew better than me, so I hope I got that right. This is Rose with some pictures throughout her life. These aren't Boris pictures, but they do look like some fake curtains and studio pictures. And I'm slightly concerned about the reality of that fur. It probably is real, I'm very sad to say. But anyway, some pictures of Rose as a young, elegant young woman, even if I am a tad biased. We've seen the Boris wedding picture already. And here she is after her marriage with my grandpa Lou on the right and her brother Jack on the left. The young boy here is my father, Rose just behind him, and on the right-hand side is my Uncle Gerald, who's still alive. Unfortunately, my father passed away about 6 years ago, and those are my Dworkin great-grandparents in the middle. As well as my father and uncle, Rose and Lou also had a daughter, who I guess would have been my aunt, but sadly she wasn't on the planet for very long, and she did suffer from Down syndrome, although my grandmother was in denial, and eventually she got put in a home somewhere, and I'm afraid she only survived for 15 months, but she's buried in the Adath Yisrael Cemetery, Carter Hatch Lane in Enfield. And my father and I put this marker down a few years ago when we suddenly realized there was nothing commemorating her on the planet. So that's why it's in quite good nick, even though, yeah, she did die quite a long time ago. And I never would have met her. Here are my grandparents, Rose and Lou again. I think they're walking down the promenade in Bournemouth, so that's after they retired. And so a fairly good set of pictures I have, and I'm quite pleased about those. Moving on to the death certificate, I actually ordered this at the same time I ordered the civil marriage certificate, but this one did arrive, so go figure, but yeah. Nothing much to report on, but I do have a lot of documentary evidence for my grandparents. And there's probate information available. I think this came from Ancestry, and you can see her address in Westbourne, which is 1 street away from where my mother lives. So for some reason, Dworkins choose to retire to Bournemouth, although I'm not sure I'm going to do it myself. Eventually, Rose and Lou passed away in the 70s, and this is their tombstone. So Rose passed away in June of 1974, aged 67. Let's go back to that birth certificate and look at Rose's parents. So Simon Schatkovsky, and Leah Pineris. You can read that straight off the birth certificate. Hopefully you can see that. And Simon and Leah died long time before I was born, but we do have their wedding picture. And this is from before 1900 in the old country, and it's a very treasured picture in our collection. I don't know if you can see, that's actually behind a wooden frame, and I don't really have a great picture of this picture because we're too scared to take it out of the wooden frame, and we think we might destroy it. So I've done my best to take pictures, but it is behind glass, and I apologize if you can see me in the picture. I do have some pictures from albums. This is Simon in later life, and this is Leah in a wheelchair, but those are the only pictures of them any one of us in the family have. So I've made up a few others of trying to zoom in, but clearly I've stolen those from the one on the left and trying to get a better view of what they actually look like. Anyway, so that's the Schatkovsky great-grandparents of mine. Simon and Leah had 4 children in all. You've already met my grandma Rose. We saw a picture of Jack, but there are a couple of siblings in the middle, Rachel or Ray, and Samuel or Sam. You can find out more on the 1911 census for the Schatkovskys. You probably can't see that, so let me zoom in. And there is Simon and Leah with the 4 children. And what's most interesting from this is that everyone was born in Russia, except for my grandma Rose, who was born in Stepney in London. And because of that, we can learn quite a lot of information about when Simon and Leah came to this country. Because one child was born in the old country, the next child was born here, Rose in 1907. So I reckon between 1905, when Sam was born in Russia, they must have emigrated about 1906. And that also tells me not to bother looking for them in the 1901 census because they were still back in Russia. 1939 register does exist, but by then people had died, people had moved away, people were married and were living with their own family groups. So zooming in, this is incredibly difficult to read, so I apologize. I can see Doris and Hank craning forward, but basically on the top we see Simon Schatkovsky, and on the bottom we see Ray or Rachel Schatkovsky. And Simon is a retired gents tailor, and Ray is a felling hand, which is also in the tailoring industry, gents tailoring. And that says Simon, just in case you didn't believe me. That says Ray, and it also mentions Rachel there. So it's clearly the right people. And you can also see the birth dates. For Simon, we see 1869. I think it's 12th of October. And it's a bit difficult to read for Ray, but born 1903, and you have to ignore that little squiggle just above the 0. From other 1939 registers, here is brother Jack with his wife Annie, a couple of children who the record has been redacted for. Similarly, there's Rose and my grandpa Lou, and my father and uncle have been redacted on that one. So let's talk about the last of the Schatkovskys. Here are the tombstones for Simon and Leah. And on the left, it's a little bit difficult to read. I will zoom in on it, but that's actually Simon's stone. And on the right, we have a very difficult to read stone. Now, I'd like to impress you with clever use of camera work and turning it blue to try to eke out every little detail of every Hebrew letter, but actually I think I just had the wrong setting on my phone and it went blue, but coincidentally I found it slightly easier to read it when it was blue. So this is the name of Leah, and I don't know if you can read that or not. I think it's quite hard. You can just about see, looks like Liba on the right hand side, daughter of, but then it's too hard. And here's another view when I didn't choose the blue setting, where the stone is just so badly weathered that, to be honest, you're guessing, except for the Schatkovsky at the top. But it's kind of got even worse, and just almost impossible. However, I got really, really lucky. In our family albums, I found Jack and Rose standing by their mother's tomb. This is the same Schatkovsky tombstone. You can see the shape and the Schatkovsky at the top, but of course this was before it got weathered. So I was really delighted to find this. If we zoom in on that, we can begin to see the real names, and finally we get to see Leah, daughter of what looks like Pinchas. So Leah, but Rev Pinchas, and the dates are 1869 to 1937 when she died. And ironically, it seems to have more about her husband on her tombstone than it does about her, but wife of Shimon ben Rev Shmuel Zadok Halevi. Now, if we switch to Simon's stone, it's easier to read the Hebrew, Shimon ben Rev Zadok Halevi, Shimon ben Zadok Halevi, and his dates are 1870 to 1944. So he didn't quite make it through the Second World War, but he did survive his wife by a good 7 years. I have their death certificates. Not much to report here except for the word myocardial degeneration appearing a lot. Jack Jackson or Jack Schatkovsky, same person, the son, reported both, or was the informant. But because of all this myocardial degeneration and I think somewhere else it talks about cerebral hemorrhage as well. Anyway, I better be a little careful and get my heart checked out, I think, because it looks like it runs in the family. This is Rose's older brother Sam's tombstone. The reason I said younger brother was he actually died very young. He was only 21, which is a bit sad. And if you zoom in on the tombstone, you get to see Shmuel, Samuel, actually Shmuel Pinchas, son of Shimon Halevi. You know he's the son of Simon. And some quite interesting artwork on the tombstone, where you see the image of a tree cut short, life cut short, which many of us seen on tombstones in the past. So clearly something happened here. He died in 1927, aged 21, beloved son of Simon and Leah. But again, the tombstone, except for the image, is wearing out quite a bit, which is a shame. This is Ray. I'm not 100% sure both pictures are Ray. To be honest, the one bottom left looks like my grandmother Rose, but the one top right is definitely Ray. She had some issues. She was in various institutions throughout her life, and did eventually pass away aged 44 in 1947. If you remember, she was born in 1903 according to the 39 register. And she was mourned by various people. Her Hebrew name, Rachel, daughter of Shimon Halevi, as we'd expect. And the people mentioned on the stone are Rose and Louis, who are still alive, Jack and Annie. Samuel had died by then, and so had Simon and Leah. So they're not mentioned on the stone explicitly. I also ordered Sam and Ray's death certificates, and with Sam, because he died so young, I was fairly sure there must be an interesting story. But again, it just seems to say myocardial failure, aortic incompetence, endocarditis, lots of heart-related things. And to be honest, that was what got my dad as well. So yeah, I really should get the ticker checked out. However, what I was told was that he had drowned, and there was a story in the family that my grandma Rose would never let my father go swimming because she was so scared of anyone drowning. But I guess it wasn't because of Sam. That was the story I heard. But sometimes you hear these things and you order the death certificate and it turns out to be a bit apocryphal. Anyway, going back to Ray, I'm afraid more myocardial degeneration. But what was interesting about this is that she did actually die in Fryan Hospital in Fryan Barnet, which I think was possibly a mental institution at the time. So I said she did have some issues with her mental health. Okay, let's talk now about Jack. He became a Jackson rather than a Schatkovsky, and I managed to find his name change in the London Gazette for business reasons. He didn't like the name Schatkovsky and wanted to sound a bit more British, and so in 1938 he went through the process, talking about other names he's had like Yankel Schatkovsky, Jack Schatkovsky, Jack Shadkovsky, so lots of different spellings. Zooming in on that, you know, it's always good to see different different spellings of names. It helps you with your searches. And the Jacksons grew into quite a clan. This is Jack and Annie seated, and they had quite a few, 3 daughters, 3 sons. And this is another Boris picture, not one that I have, but the Jackson family do, and they're very proud of it. And sadly, they've all passed away now. I actually just attended the little girl's funeral. That is Sylvia Jackson, who became Sylvia Pearl. She was married to Joseph Pearl, a Holocaust survivor. And sadly, I went to her funeral just before lockdown. That was the last physical funeral I attended. I believe that was February or very early March of this year. And quite a lot of information is kept in the book of Boris Bennett pictures, and lots of family information to be had there. A little bit about Joseph Pearl, Holocaust survivor, you see, but also the names of all the other children. I won't go into that detail, but I knew many of these people growing up. And this is Jack and Annie again with my parents. I'm guessing this is the 70s, but I'm no real fashion guru, but that looks like another real fur, for which I apologize, but such is life. That's what people used to do back then, I guess. So Jack and Annie eventually passed away. I think they both suffered from dementia, but Jack in 1974 and Annie in 1978. From the tombstone, you can see Jack is Yakov, Ben Rev Shimon, born 1897, died in 1974, and he was aged about 77. Now, the reason my grandma Rose was the last of the Schatkovskys was she did survive her brother Jack, but also he had changed his name to Jackson anyway, so he was no longer a Schatkovsky. So here we see another Boris picture of Queen Rose, the last of the Schatkovskys. So there you go. So where are the Schatkovskys from originally? Now, neither Simon nor Leah naturalized, so there weren't any petitions or certificates. They didn't really have the money for that to look up in the National Archives. As they married in the old country, there was no United Synagogue marriage authorization, which sometimes tell you the home shtetl. But what I did know was that brother Jack did naturalize. We already saw hints of that in the London Gazette. And so I looked at his naturalization papers in the National Archives. You can just search for them on the right-hand side in the Discovery search engine on the National Archives website. And then if you go in person, you can order up the certificates and the petitions and get lots of information about a particular person. And here is the important information from the certificate. It basically says we have Yankel Schatkovsky. He was known as Jack Schatkovsky or Jack Shadkovsky. No mention of Jackson in this particular document. He's in the tailoring industry as well. And here's the important thing. He came from Łask Piotrkowski near Łódź. Here's his birth date, October 1896. He's Polish, and his parents are Simon and Leah Schatkovsky. They're Russian, and his wife is called Annie. So a lot of genealogical information, some of which was brand new to me, particularly the place. And this is Łask. You can see it's quite near Łódź. That is, roughly speaking, the Piotrków district. You may have heard of that before. That's where Judge Rinder's family was from, if you watch your Who Do You Think You Are? And I've spoken to him about Piotrków before, but probably his people are from the town Piotrków rather than the whole region around Łask. But anyway, it gave us something to talk about. Now, as soon as I knew where Simon Schatkovsky came from, I could do a search on JRI Poland. And this is one of the earliest records I found in the original Polish records. And we see Simon, it's written as Sadkowski, but the birth year is right, 1869. And it's record number 61 in that year. And very importantly, there's a Mormon microfilm number. So I went along to the London Family Search Centre, ordered this particular microfilm, and lo and behold, up it popped on the screen. I think when I originally ordered this, I had to get a microfilm sent from Salt Lake City, but these days things are much easier, and if you go to any family search center, you can just bring them up on screen because they're available electronically. So this is actually quite high quality, but high quality doesn't necessarily mean readable, because we can basically see that a spider has walked across this piece of paper, and it was a Cyrillic spider. It has scrawled some very strange characters that are quite difficult to read, even if you're a fluent Russian speaker. So trust me, this is hard work. Now, I don't know how many of you speak Russian, but I certainly don't, or not very well, but I can occasionally read a few things. But what I did was put it on Jewish Gem ViewMate and got a translation which says, yep, it's the birth of Shimon Sadkowski, and he's the son of Shmuel and someone called Udla Pearl. Let me just see what messages are flashing across. Okay, Carol is a Russian speaker, splendid. Anyway, so I was delighted when I found this. I discovered a new great-great-grandmother Udla, but the Pearl bit was a little bit dubious. And we'd found Simon's birth record in the right place. We knew Shmuel from the Tombstones, but we'd now got Udla, and sadly women do disappear in history due to some records, particularly in England and Tombstones, but luckily in Poland, even under the Russian administration, they do have both parents on a birth record. So I guess we do in England too. So see that squiggle there? That basically says Udla. There it is, a little bit bigger. The Y is an U, the backwards D is a D, and the little pointy bit is a L, a bit like a lambda in Greek. And so that says either Udla or Udl. Anyway, so that is quite clear, but this is the tricky bit. Ku is readable, and here's where it gets hard. Spider writing, and that's what someone thought said Pearl. Fine. Udla Pearl. Now, Brother Jack, we knew his birth date from the naturalization record, so I also looked for him in Łask, and there Up came the birth record in the right year, 1896. The act number, the record number, 113. It's a birth record, splendid. Only trouble is there's no Mormon microfilm number, so it's not very accessible. In modern searches, you can be lucky and you can click on a link and get straight to the record. Wasn't the case here. Sometimes you can figure out how to find it on the Polish State Archives website. It wasn't there. The only way to get this record was to get on a plane, knock on the door of the Łódź Archives and beg for the record, probably in exchange for some zloty. Now, that's all well and good, but who would be idiotic enough to get on a plane for a single record, even though, and I wasn't even sure it was the right one. It looks pretty close, but it's Schatkovsky. Yeah, it probably is. Now, I look for Pineris on JRI Poland as well. Nothing. Not a single Pineris in the whole of Poland. I look for Pearls on JRI Poland. Not a single Pearl to be found. So really, we have 3 brick walls. We did find Simon Schatkovsky's birth records, and we got his parents, Shmuel and Udla. This is exciting, but there's no Pinerises, there's no Pearls. And although we found Jack's birth record on the index, it's not on Mormon microfilm on the Polish State Archives website. It's only at the Łódź Archives. So these were 3 pretty tricky brick walls to break through. Now, you remember I told you about how idiotic it would be just to go to the archives to get 1 record. As it happened in 2018, it was very exciting, and there was an IAJGS, International Association of JGSs, conference in Warsaw. So as I was going to that, it gave me the perfect opportunity to take an extra week afterwards and visit the Łódź Archives. And you may recognize 1 or 2 people here. That's me in the very loud, colorful shirt at the back. I'm standing next to Anthony Joseph, our emeritus president, and Daniel Morgan Thomas, who spoke last week, our vice president, and vice chairman, I should say. And there's a few other people there you may know: Harvey Kaplan, Miriam Margulies, Jeanette Rosenberg, Michael Tobias, Michael Shade. So lots of us were there, and it was a wonderful conference. But throughout that conference, I had one thing on my mind. That was the Łódź Archives, because, you know, okay, I paid lots of money to go to the conference, but really I had to find out more about Jack Schatkovsky's record. So here is Simon Schatkovsky's birth record. We've already seen that. Before going to Poland, I really need to get to the bottom of this Pearl conundrum. And so rather than using Jewish Gen ViewMate to do the translation, I used another source, which is Genealogy Translations. It might be called Genealogical Translations now. It changed its name at some point. I forget which way around it is. But they actually do complete translations of records for free using native speakers, and someone might be better at reading Russian than definitely me, but maybe the first person who tried to help me out. And this time, what I came up with was Kufert, not Pearl. And there it is in Russian, Kufert. So that was interesting. That's kind of broken me through one of the brick walls. And when I did a search on JRI Poland for Kufert, there were 42 records in the Piotrków gubernia. So that was a lot more promising than the very round number I found looking for Pearl. There they are. You click on the button And here's a whole set of records that come up, and some of them look quite interesting to me. There are even more records going back further in time, and that just gave me a lot of confidence that I might have got the name right, and I certainly was no worse off than looking for a name where no records appeared at all. See the section bottom left? That was particularly interesting to me, and if I zoom in on that, that second record down looks a bit like Udla Kufert, and it's a marriage. So that was the sort of thing I was looking for. Very pleased to find that. I'll come back to that a little bit later, but the good news is we are finding Kufert records. I think we're on the right track. So IAJGS conference finishes. First thing I do is get a rental car and drive to Wusk. This is my hotel. It was right next to a forest, all very nice. And of course, what do you do before you even, well, you check in first. Before I'd unpacked my bags, I was straight out that door visiting the local Jewish cemetery. This is it. There's a tree, there's a Jewish symbol, which is quite rare, to be honest, in Poland. But anyway, I knew where I was looking. I'd actually used Jewish Gen and typed in Wusk, and there's something called the virtual shtetl that tells you where all the synagogues used to be and all the cemeteries used to be, and sometimes where the cemeteries are now. But sadly, a lot of the cemeteries have been replaced with fields and there's nothing to see, but at least you get to see the official site, and sometimes there's a plaque. In this case, there was a plaque on a tree, but the stones were in incredibly bad state of repair. Since 1835, they were burying Jews here, but obviously it changed a lot around the Second World War. And this was the best stone I managed to find in the whole of the place. When I came to it, it was almost entirely covered in green moss. That's how most of them looked. So I cleaned this off with my foot. I know you're not really meant to touch stones, but everything is just destroyed. You're lucky if you can read anything, but this was the highest quality stone I could find. Now I was looking for Schatkovskys, and sadly I didn't find a single one, so that was sad. But if your Hebrew is good enough, you can see the given name in the middle, Avraham, and at the top, the surname, Berkovich. Now, some of you may have read my Berkovich epic, which has been serialized in 6 parts in Shemot, well, 6 and counting. I'd actually found Abraham Berkovich, who I'd looked for in Warsaw, and found 6 different Abraham Berkoviches, and the only stone I tripped over in Wusk, a completely different area, was Abraham Berkovich. Now, the fact that my research had moved on and I discovered Abraham was the wrong name and I should have been looking for a Shmuel Berkovich is immaterial. I thought this was a good omen. But sadly, I didn't find any Schatkovskys in this particular graveyard. There were some other graveyards, but in the end, I just went around taking pictures of every stone in case it might come into future use. And you never know, perhaps my Berkovich research will throw up an important Abraham who happened to live in the Piotrków area, and at least I've got a picture of it. Anyway, so that is my cemetery experience. I then went back to my hotel room and decided to contact the Wusk town leader on JRI Poland. So I was preparing for my trip the next day to the Łódź archives so I could get this really important birth record of Jack Jackson, Janko Schatkovsky. And an email popped up almost immediately, and it wasn't really from the town leader. It was from Stanley Diamond, who's the head of JRI Poland, and he was the acting town leader. And that was quite interesting. I've met Stanley before. He's helped me with my research in various areas. And I basically told him my story. I told him I was in Wask and about to find this record. And he said, oh, that's interesting. And he said, did you know this is the data that's off the record? And he'd done a transcription for me. He had it on his computer. And this is the birth record of Jack Jackson, Yankel Schatkovsky, and his father is Simon, we knew that. And his mother is Leah, we knew that. But the maiden surname is not Pineris. It's actually Lipkovich. So that was a little different to what I was expecting. And I thanked him profusely, as you do. And I suddenly realized I was sat in Poland waiting to go into the archives. And I'd sent an email from my hotel room bedroom, and I could have done that from Maidenhead, which was a little embarrassing. To really get another kick in the teeth, he also sent me the record itself. So there I was, having traveled all that way to Poland to get this record, and he'd emailed it to me. So the important lesson to learn here is don't be afraid to ask for stuff. I didn't pay a penny. He did encourage me to donate at some point, and I said, oh yeah, sure, I'll get around to it, but I'm in Poland right now. Yeah, anyway. So here is the record, and just to pick out some of the details, as you can see, it's in Russian, but there is Yankel, you can see the Y, the backwards R. This is Shimon Shadkovsky. The mother is Leah Lipkovich. Okay, so that's the important information you get, but usually I do like to get full translations of records just in case there's anything else. So let's look into the Lipkovich rather than Pineris. What's going on? We have documentary proof that the maiden name was Pineris. It's on that birth certificate. And what I decided was that maybe Pineris was misheard, and it could just be a typo or a mishearing of Pinchas. When the birth was registered, they said, you know, what's the name of the mother's father, and his Pinchas, you know, and somehow it got written down the mother is Leah Pineris or Liba Pineris. So, you know, Liba, Batrev Pinchas, Pineris, somehow it got muddled up. And the true test of whether Lipkovich is right, any more correct than Pineris, remember we couldn't find a single Pineris record, is are there any Lipkoviches in Wask? And here's the search. There are loads of them all over the place. So basically this gave me confidence I'd broken through another brick wall, and I just got the name wrong. Pineris is completely spurious, and the real name is Lipkovich. Stanley said, oh, did you know there's a birth record for Liba Lipkovich? And now I knew the name Lipkovich, I could see it myself in the JRI Poland indexes. And there's a microfilm number. So I knew I could get it back home on Mormon microfilm, but also I was in Poland. I was right next to the Łódź archive, so I could just go in and get that. I think I asked Stanley for it, and he was getting a bit cagey because I was kept asking for stuff for free. But what he did tell me was, oh, did you know there's a marriage record for Szymon Schatkovsky and Liba Lipkovich? But you're not going to find it because it's not in the JRI Poland indexes. But he did supply the data from the record for free. And I lapped it up. So lo and behold, there is Szymon marrying Liba. We know Szymon's parents are Udla and Shmuel, and there's another mention of Kufert, so we know it's the right person. And Liba's parents are Pinchas, which we knew, and a new name, Estera Lipkovich. So that was all very exciting. And I got a new great-great-grandmother I never knew about before, Estera. I then asked him, oh, send me the record, please. And he outright refused. I was just getting too pushy, asking for too much for nothing. But he said, you know, all you have to do is donate. It's $100 or $200. I can't remember what it is. And it'll help us transcribe faster. And yeah. Anyway, I decided I would bide my time and go and visit the archives. This is what they look like. And here is the Liebe Lipkovich birth record. Now, this is probably a little difficult to read because it was me taking a photo off a screen. They don't allow you to touch the original records, but you can just about make out, or maybe Carol Shaw can make out that this says Pinchas something Vich, Lipkovich. That's the Vich. The child is called Liba, and the mother is called Esther Lipkovich again. And so what that means is we actually have two Lipkoviches marrying here. So the maiden name of the mother is the same. So I guess it's a cousin marriage, but I'm not really sure. When I did get home, I got the record translated, and it says pretty much what I just did. Pinchas Lipkovich marrying Esther Lipkovich. The child's called Liebe. Liba. It's got all the ages, but quite importantly, and I didn't know this from looking at the record because my Russian isn't good enough, they came from a village called Volka. So the new information, Esther or Estera and Volka. When I got home, I looked at the same information on Mormon microfilm and it actually looks different. I don't know if you can see, but you know, it's the same information. There is Pinchas Lipkovich, there's the child called Liba, there's the mother Estera, but they're kind of in different places and it looks a lot different. So why is that? And then I started to learn about unicat and duplicat records. This is actually the duplicat. And it's kind of the difference between having a local registry office record and a GRO record. Sometimes at some point in the process, they get copied and transferred, and they are two different versions of records around. And sometimes they say different things, which is quite interesting. Anyway, so this is the record, but the translation of it is exactly the same. And the key new information is still that I have a great-great-grandmother, Estera, and Volka was where they were from. Now, sadly, I did this when I was back in England, and Volka was only an 11-minute drive from where my hotel was in Wask, but I didn't know about it, so I couldn't visit, but it's on my list of places to visit next time I'm in the area. And you can at least have a look at it on Google Maps, Google Earth, whatever it is, and get a feeling for what the village might look like. When I was in the archives, I also got the marriage record of Shimon Schatkovsky and Leah Glebkovich. If you remember, this wasn't in the indexes, but Stanley Diamond did provide it to me. And again, I got that translated, this time on ViewMate, and also on genealogical translations. And it gives you lots more information about the parents of Shimon Schatkovsky and Leah Glebkovich. So, do you remember the Kuferts and these records we found in the GRI Poland indexes? I don't know how many of you use GRI Poland, but the way to read this is there are 3 pairs here, and each pair is a marriage. So at the top, we have the one we're most interested in. There's Udla Kufert, and she's marrying a Falk Pizdrovsky. Here is a Zola Kufert, and she's marrying a Shmuel Tudek. And finally, we have a Bela Kufert, and she is marrying a Falk Pizdrovsky. So that's all kind of interesting. So the questions I have about Udla is, why is she marrying Falk Pizdrovsky? Who is Zola Kufert? Who is Bela Kufert? And why is Bela marrying Udla's Falk? And don't forget that Udla had a son, Simon, with Shmuel Schatkovsky in 1869. So piecing this all together, it's a bit puzzling. So I looked at the records. This was when I was back home again. This is the marriage of Udla to Falk Pizdrovsky. got it translated on genealogical translations. It's kind of second nature to me now, but if you don't know how to do it, it's really something you need to help you with your Polish research. And when we zoom in on the record, first of all, we can almost read it. So that must mean it's in Polish, not in Russian. So there's Udla Kufert. There is Falk Pizdrowski. So the information you expect to find on their marriage record. This is the Zola Kufert marriage. And what was interesting about this is when I got it translated, it wasn't Zola at all. It was actually Udla. Ah, the mystery deepens. So there's a second marriage, but the Zola was a mistranscription by J.R.I. Poland. It happens. But when we look at the record itself, it gets harder because it's in Russian, but this says Shmuel Tudek. This says not Zola, but Udla. And this is the Kufert that now we're beginning to recognize. Okay, let's look at the third marriage, Bela Kufert to Falk Pizdrowski. Got that translated as well, lots of parents' names, etc., etc. And when we zoom in on this Russian record, we get to see Falk Pizdrowski and Bela Kufert, hopefully beginning to recognize Kufert in Russian. So let's go back to our questions. Why is Udla marrying the wrong man, Falk Pizdrowski? Well, why not? I mean, maybe she had her first marriage and it didn't work out, and okay. Who is Zola Kufert? Oh my God, it's not Zola at all, it's Udla. So why is Udla remarrying someone called Shmuel Tudek? And that, although it's written Kudek, that in Polish that's pronounced Tudek, like with a tzaddik in Hebrew. So I guess there's no reason she can't remarry a small Shmuel Tudek. Who is Bela Kufert? Probably a younger sister, the parents matched. And why is Bela marrying Udla's Falk? Well, again, why not? I guess the younger sister picked up the discarded husband if the first marriage didn't work. But here's the big question. Why did Udla have a son, Simon, with Shmuel Schatkovsky in 1869 when she'd only married a Shmuel Tudek, who was her second husband, a few years previously? And that was why I said Udla, Udla, Udla for her 3 separate marriages. So let's look into this in a bit more detail. Tudek is the same as Sodek, Tudek, and it gets transcribed this way, but when I did the research, I managed to find a record for the birth of this man who Udla had married, her second marriage, by looking for Shmuel Sodek. That's kind of the Polish way, and it was in Łask, in the right town, in 1828. And this is what it looks like. So I got this from Mormon Microfilm. It's quite easy to read. Because it's in 1828, it's in Polish, not in Russian at all. Russians didn't take over till 1860 something. And we can quite easily pick out some of the words, but in fact it's been transcribed on J.R.I. Poland, and we get to see that the parents are Jacob and Freda Sodek. The child is called Shmuel, and it's a birth from 1828. And so there's a signature on there from Jacob Sodek. I got it fully translated, that teased out all that information plus the ages, but pretty much they got it right in the transcription. And here are the signatures, the father signing Jacob Sodek, and you can see the Hebrew for what looks like Yaakov Sodek in Hebrew. However, when I was in the archives, I looked at the same record. And this is the Unicat record, the original one, before it was copied for the central archives. And this looks a little bit different. Has the same transcription, has the same translation. But when I looked at the Hebrew, I thought this looked different to me. So Jacob, the father of the child, on the first one, the one at the bottom, has actually signed using a patronymic, and it says Yaakov ben Yossel. In the top one, the duplicate, it just says Yaakov Tzudek, is signed using a surname. So it's quite a subtle difference, but to me it made all the difference because it meant I'd gone back one more generation by looking at the unicat rather than the duplicate that's available easily on Family Search on Mormon Microfilm. But by going to the archives, I'd gone back one more generation, making the thousands of pounds I spent on the trip incredibly worthwhile. So I'm sure you've been thinking about this. There are two Shmuels. Could Shmuel Schatkovsky actually be the same person as Shmuel Tzudek? But unfortunately, there was no mention of Schatkovsky on any of the Tzudek Polish records or Russian records. And there was no mention of Tzudek on any of the Schatkovsky Polish or Russian records. However, do you remember those tombstones back in England? Simon's and Leah's? We were lucky to have a picture of Leah's. We got the names of the deceased, and basically it mentioned Simon and his Hebrew name. And there it says Shimon ben Rev Shmuel Tzadok, I thought it said Halevi. And on Simon's tombstone itself, again, Shimon ben Rev Tzadok Halevi. What if instead of being Sadok Halevi and Sadok Halevi, Shmuel Sadok Halevi, it was actually Tzudek? It was incredibly close. So the proof was staring me at the face all along. It was carved into the stone. I thought Zadok meant like a priest, like Levi. Is it Zadok the priest, or perhaps that's not a Jewish thing anyway, but that's what I had in my head. But in fact, carved into the stone was memory of the original surname before Schatkovsky. So let's go back to our questions. Why is Udla marrying Folk Petrovsky? Well, never mind, it was an unsuccessful first marriage, that's fine. Who is Zola Kufert? Oh my God, it's Udla. Why is she remarrying Shmuel Tzudek? Well, why not? It's a second marriage, hopefully a successful one. Who is Bela? She's the younger sister. Why is Bela marrying Udla's Folk? Well, why not? I guess she picked up her sister's leavings. And then finally, why did Udla have a son, Simon, with Shmuel Schatkovsky in 1869? It's okay because Shmuel Schatkovsky and Shmuel Tzudek are one and the same. So this allowed me to draw my family tree. You remember Simon and Leah, the only pictures I have of them apart from their wedding picture. We'd found out the name of Leah's parents from birth records, from marriage records in Poland. We'd find Simon's birth certificate, which had given us Udla and Shmuel. There's a fairly complicated love triangle going on with Folk Pizdrovsky and Udla and Bela, but forgive me for having so many equal signs in a tree. But we do know that Bela and Udla had the same parents, Shimon and Perla Kufat. And we also know Shmuel's Schatkovsky parents, Jacob and Freda. We discovered that on various birth certificates. And finally, from that Unicat record, we'd worked out that Jacob, we'd gone back one generation to Yossel Tzudek, and he must have been born somewhere around 1780 from my calculations. So I discovered a new great-great-grandmother, Astera, a new great-great-grandmother, Udla, 4 new triple great-grandparents in Jacob and Freda and Shimon and Perla, and 1 new 4 times great-grandfather, Yossel, born around 1780. So I was quite happy with how my research had gone, and all because I got on a plane and schmoozed with Stanley Diamond, the head of JRI Poland. You can do this too. So conclusion, take everything you read on British records with a large pinch of salt. Even though you think that it's a reliable British record, salt is good for you. be skeptical all the time, build good relationships with JRI Poland town leaders and with Stanley Diamond, and do donate. You get more if you make a small donation, and they're even more helpful. And even when you think you know it all about Polish research, as I am embarrassed to admit, I thought at one point, suddenly I discovered duplicate, unicat, and secret records that weren't in any of the indexes. Finally, you really should be respectful of your ancestors. Udla was really only a bigamist or a trigamist in my own warped mind. So there you have it. A quick postscript just before I end. I did pay Stanley Diamond some money, and he sent me spreadsheets of records that were secret. Now, they're not really secret. I'm sure in the next few years they will appear, but right now, if you don't have this relationship with your town leader, you will not get the spreadsheets. And one of the entries in the spreadsheet, I think you can see, I tried to get Sadoks, Sudeks, Schatkovskys, Kuferts, you know, all sorts of, even Pezdrovskys, and I have spreadsheets of those records. Hidden in one of them was this death record for Shmuel Schatkovsky, and it does include the Sudek as well as the Schatkovsky in the record. And Stanley sent it to me when I asked. Admittedly, I'd paid by now, and in this record, well, maybe you can see it right at the bottom, it's basically Shmuel Sudek Schatkovsky. His father was Yankiel, his mother was Freda, it fitted everything I knew. His spouse is Udla, so it's definitely the right person, but this is the only record, as opposed to Tombstone, I have with both names on it. And you can see that says Shmuel Sudek, that says Schatkovsky. The parents are Yankiel and Freda, and the wife is Udla. But what I didn't get until I got the full translation of this record was that there are actually 7 children. So I'd only discovered 1 or 2. So I now have 5 times as much research to do because of obtaining this record, but that will be the next installment of the Schatkovsky saga, I guess. And here is the translation, again using genealogical translations, a wonderful resource on Facebook if you've not discovered it. And with that, I will end and stop sharing my screen, and I will do my best to take your questions. So, thank you. I'm out of breath. I should have had a glass of water. Does anyone want to raise their hand, either technically
ask him again about
or in front of their face, and feel free to ask a question.
Ask him about the Facebook.
Michael?
Could you just repeat? That was terrific, especially as my family comes from near Watch as well. And you've given me all sorts of avenues to explore. But could you just give us again that translation that you used? Because we're making some few notes and I didn't quite catch it.
Okay, so on Facebook, look for genealogy translations and also look for genealogical translations. It's one or the other, and it's kind of both. One is an archive now. There was a slight changing of the guard, and it's kind of the same people behind the new one, but one of the leaders got left behind in a putsch. So anyway, these things happen. But yeah, it's a wonderful resource. You can also use Jewish Gem ViewMate, another free resource, but they tend to be less willing to do full translations. And I don't know about you, but you know, when I just get the names and the ages, and they miss out something vital like a town or, you know, sometimes you just don't know what's there until you see the full thing, and my Russian just isn't good enough to pick that out. So even my Polish isn't good enough to pick it out, and I can at least see the letters. You know, I don't speak Polish, but Cyrillic can be a bit of a challenge. I mean, I don't know if you can see, I am reasonably Russian. Not only is my name Russian, but there's a Russian doll on the cabinet there,
I
and
noticed that.
my wife happens to be a Russian teacher, but so that can help if any of you are unmarried. Following in the style of Udla, if you would like to remarry my wife, she might help you with the Russian translations. But no. To be honest, the problem with my wife's Russian is the alphabet has changed, and modern Russian has a few less letters than some of these records. So it's kind of ironic, but I can be a little better than her with the handwritten stuff, but she's great with the printed stuff. She knows what it means, but I can sort of pick out names with bad handwriting, perhaps because I know what I want it to say. Anyway, yeah.
Right. Thanks very much.
Sure.
Thank you.
Any other questions? David Tanner?
Hi, Leigh. Thank you very much for that. It's a comment, but it is a question as well. Even though you didn't find the headstones that you were looking for, I'm really curious to know how it felt being in the area and the region, even though you couldn't perhaps find anything concrete, deliberate pun. How was it for you actually being there?
I mean, this is my second time that I've been to Poland. So the first time I was on a business trip, and I just tacked on a few days afterwards to visit Zambrów, which is the place in northeast Poland where my Yellen family is from. I've written about them fairly extensively, but when I visited the cemetery there, it was kind of a really bittersweet experience because it was completely destroyed, you know. So you basically walk into the forest, you trip over a stone, and you happen to notice that stone has some Hebrew on it. So how do you feel about that? You know, that used to be a tombstone. There's no one there to look after it at all, and the forest has taken over. It was kind of the same thing here, but at least here it was just a bit of moss. It wasn't on a steep foresty embankment as I found in Zambrów. So I'm glad it's still there. It is both upsetting and wonderful to find it, but what I tend to do is I don't really care whether they're my people or not. I take pictures of the stone. If there's someone I do vaguely recognize, I might actually read the Kaddish. And from that point of view, it's really peaceful. You've got to be careful of wildlife. I got quite a bad mosquito bite once in one of these places. My hands swelled up to the size of a basketball. But anyway, I have allergy problems. But you've got to be a little careful. And also, I suddenly realized I was completely alone in the forest. If I tripped and fell down the bank and broke a leg, I probably wouldn't have been able to contact people, given that that whole region doesn't seem to speak a word of English. So, when I've been looking for cemeteries in the past, I've tried to communicate with locals to tell me, where is the Jewish cemetery? And I don't speak Polish. So I know the word for Jew, and I try and mime dead person. And it could go badly wrong if you think about it. It probably does pay to look at virtual shtetl on Jewish Gen, try and find out where you think the cemeteries are. And in some cases, the cemeteries are now fire stations, and there's just a plaque on the wall, and there's just nothing to see. I walked around a huge field in it wasn't Wask, but I forget the exact area. I'm just about to write about it. But I walked around this field and it told me it was a cemetery. I could not find a single tombstone. And then I found one, and it was a stone. It might have been a tombstone, but I'm counting it. So I couldn't see any Hebrew on it, but it was face down. And I think it was the only one they hadn't managed to remove. And for me, that was an achievement. But maybe it's a romantic view of it, and I'm inventing something that wasn't quite there. But what's really sad is that the cemetery's just been completely wiped out. And once it was where our people were, and I'm sure you've seen those pictures from the 20s and 30s of huge numbers of stones everywhere in Eastern Europe. And sometimes they've gone, they've been used to, you know, they've been moved when they've built sports centres, they've moved all the stones. So yeah, it's a bit of a interesting, bittersweet experience. Okay, Hazel Dakers, if you could unmute yourself. Me try to ask to unmute. No.
Sorry,
There you go.
the wrong thing. I had a similar experience a good many years ago now, 10, 12 years ago. I went to Zgierz on an organized gathering by local people of Jewish descendants of Zgierz, of descendants of Zgierz Jews. That's the other side of Łódź. And there was a big gathering at the site of part of the cemetery that had been enclosed by some Canadians maybe 20, 30 years before. Not a sign of a stone anywhere. And we were even told that people had tried to buy back some of the stones from local people using them on their patios, that sort of use. But buying back even had been refused. The local radio station was there, you know, there was a service and so on. It was very moving, but desperately sad. And my experience of going to the Łódź archives on that occasion was also being shown films, but I was under the impression I was looking at the Mormon films there, and I thought, well, blow this, I paid for them to come to London, I can look at them there.
Yeah, no, they're different, and I kind of expected them to be the same, but it was only afterwards in discussion with Stanley Diamond, why are they different? And then there is quite a lot of documentation on Unicat and Duplicat records, and it explains them. And you know, it's good to have two copies. Sometimes one has survived and the other hasn't, but it also gives genealogists a big problem that you suddenly realize you can't stop just when you found the duplicate. Maybe you should be looking for the Unicat as well, because you never know what might be different. And yeah, and I suppose the same's here, true here. I mean, I've got a lot more out of seeing original marriage entries than looking at a marriage certificate that's been hand copied by a clerk when you order a marriage certificate in England. And you know, that usually works, but if someone signed in Hebrew, which was the case in my great-grandmother's case, the clerk had carefully copied that Hebrew into English letters and completely garbled it. So, you know, it was important to see the original.
Eva wishes to say something.
Okay, can you unmute yourself, Eva? Can you unmute, Eva?
Unmute.
That's it. The thing about handwritten records, the ones in England, you don't really see the signatures of your own ancestors. You just see a copy of them from somebody at the General Record Office. Because I've seen sort of their original signatures on some other documents, and they copied it, but it's not the same. It's not, you know, their hand, it's somebody copying their hand. They these birth certificates and things they send you, or marriage certificates, are just copied at the National Archives, at the General Register Office by hand, apparently.
Well, I think it's changed actually, Eva, and originally it
maybe they're
was
supposed
like
to copy them now, but
yeah, they're supposed to copy the middle section, and so you can see the originals in some cases, but
in some if you're lucky, yes.
If you're lucky, yeah.
Oh, and about the other thing, choosing two records. That was my question last meeting that I was repeating, that if you go back to a record, you discover someone's changed their mind about it and rubbed a bit out and put what they think is a better. This was a sort of list made from the original records, and it would move from one archive to the other. And somebody had rewritten the list and thought they'd improved it. Well, they may have done, but it's very confusing when you've already got the old one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they said this man I'm asking you about came from Maren from Hollishow, and it turns out he came from, and then somebody else wrote St. Nicolaus. It's supposed to be the same record, but it's just another copy I got later on with the same catalogue number and two different results on it.
Yeah. I guess
I
the way
found
I
that-
look at it is it gives you the chance to write a really interesting story about something people
Well, I
have never
have,
thought
yes.
about for Shemot. And
Well, until I find
yeah.
the man, it's not much use.
But you know,
Yeah.
if it was too easy and all the records were
Yes.
perfect, just think how boring life would be, you know.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Ava. Any other questions?
Oh, I did have another question while
Okay.
I'm unmuted. I noticed that the sh sound on your Polish records looked like a shin. Is that a coincidence?
Well, the shin is the sh sound in Russian. So
The
yes,
Hebrew shin.
you know, so a Hebrew shin is kind of the
Yes.
same letter as the sh sound in Russian. So
Yes, they look the
yeah.
same.
yeah.
I wondered.
So I mean, I haven't given the talk for quite a long time, but
I was just looking at the record, and
yeah, no,
I
I give this talk which is trying to teach people to learn Russian, Polish, Hebrew, all in the space of one hour talk. It's not a very successful talk, but I'm nothing if I'm not ambitious. But basically, if you use your Greek knowledge, your Hebrew knowledge, you can piece together Russian and
No, but on the record,
Polish,
on your actual manuscript record,
yeah.
I picked out the word Shmuel something, because you put a red line round it.
Yeah.
And the Russian went from left to right. So the Hebrew goes from right to left. But the actual sound seemed to be produced by the same character.
Yeah.
It's a different character. It's just coincidental. The Cyrillic alphabet has nothing to do with Hebrew.
Did the Russians learn their...
No, it's nothing to do with Hebrew. It's just so happens that the Russian sound sh is translated by a symbol that looks very much like a shean. Yeah. It's just coincidental. It's not a shean. It's actually the Russian sound. It's coincidental.
It sounds different in Russian.
Sorry?
It sounds different in Russian.
No,
it sounds the same.
No, the sound is the same. It's
but
simply...
the character.
No, let me start again. The Russian spelling of the sound sh looks like a Hebrew sheen.
Yes.
But it looks like it, but it's coincidental. It's actually not the same letter. Yeah. It's not the same printed letter. It's not the same handwritten letter. It just that it sort of, when you see it, it looks similar, but it is not a shean. Yeah.
Let me give another example. I mean, the th sound in Kufert looks like a phi from Greek, but again, I'm almost certain it's a coincidence.
Well, Russian and Greek do have a lot in common. They're two.
It's not Leigh, it's not coincidental. The Cyrillic alphabet was a combination of Greek and Latin.
Okay.
Yes, I know.
With some extras, but it's nothing to do with Hebrew.
Okay.
No, that's why I was surprised.
Yeah, it's interesting, but it's a coincidence.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wonder.
All right. Okay. Shall we move on? Any other questions from anyone? David Tanner, you want to ask another?
Yeah, in case we need it, Leigh, can you teach us how to mime being Jewish? What did you do?
Well, I think the dead part was some. I don't quite remember. That looks more like baby, doesn't it? But I knew the word for Jew, which was Zidov, and I tried to use that to my advantage. But all I can say is I think I was quite lucky that the Polish gentleman didn't really understand me, and I don't know how you guys react when you're suddenly in a place where you realize no one speaks a word of English. And I thought it was wonderful. You basically go back to first principles of communication. It doesn't really matter that you don't know what's going on and they don't know what you want. You can communicate. And, you know, there's certain things like pizza and a beer that are quite easy. You can point, you know, if you're in the right place. But dead Jew is, I found, a bit more challenging. Quite often when I go around cemeteries, you get there and you can't get in. You found the cemetery, but the whole place is locked. Now, on my second trip to Poland, in one of them, I had to climb a tree to get over the wall to get in. In another, I'd say the wall was at about this height, and I just had to sort of jump up and get over it. And that was fine until I realized I needed to get out again. And yeah, you're just so desperate. You've gone all the way to Poland to find this cemetery and you can't get in. But what do you do if there's no number to call? One of the cemeteries I went to in a place called, is it Gora Kalvaria, I think? No, I think I'm mixing up with somewhere in Belarus. Anyway, never mind. But I actually found a plaque with a number to call, and I did call that number, even though I could maybe have crawled under a metal fence, that someone had prized the metal bars up. And I thought, well, I know I can half get under there, but I'm not sure if I can entirely get under there. And again, I'm not sure if I could get back. So sometimes you take these decisions, and so far it hasn't gone totally wrong for me. I did manage to get out of that one I jumped over the wall for. I can't remember which tree I used to get out of the one I used a tree to get in, but it is often like that. And sometimes I spend many hours knocking on houses trying to explain dead Jews to Poles. And I don't always get lucky, and I have had the door shut in my face before. But you know, if you live next to a Jewish cemetery, you'd think you'd be able to pass on a little bit of information, but you know, it can be hard. Now in Warsaw, it's okay. There's, you know, people who speak better English, but as you go out to, you know, Zambrów in the northeast, you know, even ordering a pizza was hard there if I didn't do it in Polish. So I tended to use pointing, and beer is reasonably easy because Zambrów is actually named after the European bison, which is a Zuber, and a Zuber is a brand of beer. So it was, you just sort of combine bison, you know, and they give you beer. So I think this is hugely embarrassing because my wife is a linguist, but you know, you can tell my language skills are a little bit self-taught. Yeah.
Why don't you take her with you?
Let's just say there's no way she would climb over a wall or into a tree to get into a Jewish cemetery. Yeah, she's more of a plush hotel person, but you know. Any other comments or questions?
I'd just say, if you have in a smartphone, you can use Google Translate on the go. You know, call up Polish. You can in fact download it, so you can do it offline. So,
yeah, I certainly use it a lot on the computer, and you know, when I write to archives, I tend to write in English followed by the Google translation, and it usually works. There are times it doesn't quite work, but what I tend to find is if you write to an archive, then they write back in Polish with no English. And for some reason, it's not text. It's in a PDF as an image. So you have to type it all in again by hand, put it through Google Translate. And then there's the added potential errors of your mistyping, which has proved challenging in the past. But in the end, I usually get what I want, but it can take a few months, and it's good to have a bit of patience in this business, I find.
Stanley used to have a standard letter that we could all use. Needed to get those records for a long time now. I got
yeah. On JRI Poland, I believe there is a pro forma that is meant to help. I've not used that. I think that would be too easy. I guess I'd rather draw these little cartoons of dead Jews, but yeah. Sorry, I mustn't keep going on about that. Any other comments or questions?
I was just saying about Google Translate.
Oh, yeah.
You can use it while you're on the go. I don't mean writing. You just type in, you know, thank you very much, let's say, and it will come up for the Polish for it, or Jewish cemetery, and just show it to the person you're talking to.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, do use technology. I mean, I tend to use my phone to help me navigate around cemeteries, because there are websites where you can find out where you are in the grid system by recognizing a name and typing it into the Polish cemetery database website. And so I use it for that, but quite often my phone runs out of battery because I must be using it too much. But I suppose I'm a little reticent as well. I don't know. Maybe that's one technology that I don't use too much. But it's always good to prepare very well before you go to these places, because you never know when it's suddenly going to rain, and you say, right, well, I can't go there, I'll go somewhere else. And that happened to me once. And I went to a very famous town called Jedwabne, and I couldn't find anything Jewish there. I could only find the Christian bits and some cows, which were very pleasant, but not really why I'd gone. And that's because I was doing just-in-time research, and my notes for the next day weren't on me. So it's always good to carry as much with you on your smartphone, just in case, definitely. Yeah.
But you know, there's a sad thing about Jedwabne. They turned against the Jew. I mean, there was a big slaughter in Jedwabne.
Well,
So,
I lost my great-grandmother's sister's husband there. So yeah, I've read lots of books about Jedwabne, like Neighbours and The Crime and the Silence. And yeah, it's a pretty sad story, but it was sadly replicated in quite a few villages in that area. And yeah, a lot of Jews died by being set on fire in barns, but that is the most famous example. And in Jedwabne, there's actually a monument that includes a barn door because of the atrocity in 1941. Yeah. Any more questions or comments? In which case, I think you've probably earned a cup of tea. So how are we doing for time? It is 3:40. What I propose is let's have a 10-minute break. So let's meet back here at 3:50, and we can turn it into a more general workshop-y discussion about anything Eastern European. So thanks for listening. Thanks for a very intelligent set of questions. I hope I answered them seriously enough. But yeah, let's reconvene at 10 to 4. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. As always, thank you, Leigh.
My
Good
pleasure.
boy.